Hello everyone, Arlecchino got a buff and cat ears in the latest patch, so today we are gonna be playing her. And with that, let's get into the games. And here we go with the first game. Now, since this deck is nothing new, this is an old Arlecchino deck, I simply did a couple minor changes. And we are only going to have a couple replays today, and there's only a small little change to Arlecchino's kit in this latest patch. But I will nonetheless quickly go over the deck and the change to Arlecchino. Now the deck composition itself very simple. You want to get Arlecchino the skill and especially get the talent card for her. You want Frost Operative to increase the amount of Bond of Life on the opponent's characters, and you have Lanyan to swirl to easily spread Bond of Life from Arlecchino's skill, as well as provide us extra protection with the shields. But let's quickly go over Arlecchino's little change. Now the skill creates 3 stacks of Blood Depth Directive instead of 5. So this used to be 5 stacks. And now what the Blood Depth Directive does, when your character receives damage, this is the opponent character of course, because this goes to the on the opponent side of field. So when the opponent takes damage from anything, note, anything that does damage activates this. Attach 2 stacks of Bond of Life to the character and the opponent's Arlecchino. So basically, the opponent takes 2 stacks of Bond of Life and Arlecchino gains 2 stacks of Bond of Life. Now of course, this used to be 1 and 1. Or to be precise, that number right there used to be 1. Meaning the opponent only took 1 Bond of Life. Your Arlecchino only acquired 1 Bond of Life. But now it is changed to 2, and this is indeed a very big buff for Arlecchino aggro decks. This is specifically good if you play Arlecchino as an aggressive character. Because you can see now here, we did the skill, and one notable part of the skill, when you do the skill, it immediately activates the Blood Depth Directive. You can see the opponent has 2 Bond of Life. My Arlecchino has 5, 3 from the talent card and 2 from the Blood Depth Directive activation. What used to be the case with Arlecchino, if you wanted to play her aggressively, the opponent would only have 1 Bond of Life, you could do an attack, and that would deal 3 damage. That is to say, if you did a skill and 10 normal attacks, your normal attack would deal 3 damage. Now instead of that, you deal 4. That is to say, all you need, do the skill, follow it up with a normal attack, that is 2 plus 4 damage. So 6 damage in total with a simple skill plus normal attack combo. And of course, because the opponent has 2 more stacks of the Blood Depth Directive, after you've done a normal attack for 4 damage, they immediately, because how Arlecchino does increased damage, how Arlecchino does increased normal attack damage is, when the opponent has Bond of Life, the damage is increased up to 3 depending on the stack size of Bond of Life, but it also consumes the opponent's Bond of Life. That is to say, if I now did a normal attack with Arlecchino, those 2 Bond of Life would disappear, but Arlecchino would deal plus 2 normal attack damage. But how the Blood Depth Directive works, immediately after you've done damage, the opponent gains 2 more Bond of Life, meaning you can follow it up with another 4 damage normal attack. That is to say, all you need is a skill plus 2 normal attacks to take out a 10 HP character. Meaning Arlecchino as an aggressive character is now far better than she used to be. Because previously it would be 2 damage and then 3 damage from the normal attacks. If you only played Arlecchino, that is. If you didn't use something like Frost Operative or artifacts to increase the amount of Bond of Life. And this means Arlecchino, in my previous Arlecchino videos I've stated, Arlecchino was best used in mid-range decks. She was not good to use as an aggro character, she was good in mid-range. You wanted to spread the Bond of Life, you wanted to take your time, and only after all of the opponent characters had at least a few stacks of Bond of Life would you want to actually go to Arlecchino and start damaging the opponent team with her. And this deck, this is made in that old mindset, when the Blood Depth Directive wasn't such a good damage bonus for Arlecchino. Back then, this deck was good, or well, this character composition. I didn't bother actually making up anything new, but you would nowadays I would probably say run some double cryo stuff with Arlecchino and make it a very aggressive deck. Alternatively, if you want to be a more meta counter, you can use, or want to make Arlecchino be a solo carry, you can use double Geo, because Geo Resonance is one of the few cards that are actually good with Arlecchino, because of course Arlecchino does not heal from anything except the burst. Well, anyway, while the characters are the old ones, made for the mid-range version of the deck, I have decided to pick up the new Arcane card, quite the fits to almost any deck, but they are still like, if you for example want specifically to get a talent card, it is still better to play Stove card. The reason why I'm not playing Stove card in this deck, even though Arlecchino's talent card is a must-have with Arlecchino, is because, well, I only played a couple games with this deck. I merely tried out the buff. And I say, it is a good buff. Arlecchino is very good, and in the future I will probably make Arlecchino aggro deck with double cryo most likely. And we'll see how that will go, but for now I simply picked up my old Arlecchino deck and did some minor changes. Anyway, so Arlecchino is now better in full aggro and less good actually in mid-range, because now that the Blood Depth Directive stacks are only 2, that also means, and like you saw there, when you use the skill you immediately consume one of the stacks. It makes it easier to have a one character with a bunch of Bond of Life like you see here, but it makes it harder to have the whole team with Bond of Life. So Arlecchino went from being a good stall counter, you know, being able to tank a lot of damage and spreading Bond of Life, to being a good aggro character that can also tank damage. That's basically what has changed with Arlecchino with this buff and the playstyle. And because of the change in the playstyle, there are a handful of little changes in the, or well, personal opinions I've said in the past. In the past, I have brought up the fact that Arlecchino is best played with Frost Operative, and I've also said that Arlecchino is good to play with an Anemo, goddammit, that's hard to say, an Anemo character. So you want a Nemo character and Frost Operative if you wanted to play Arlecchino. Like, my personal preference with the old Arlecchino was that you should always have Frost Operative, and you should always have, well, not always, but it's good to have an Anemo character with Arlecchino, because when you had the 5 stacks of the Blood Depth Directive, it took a lot of time to, you know, consume all of those stacks if you didn't use an Anemo character to spread, do a swirl which would get 1 stack to each of the opponent characters, you know, immediately spending 3 of the 5 stacks that it used to be. But now that it's only 3 stacks, you do not need an Anemo character for that purpose anymore. Like Lanyan, like mentioned, I would probably go for... I would still keep Frost Operative, because in the cases where you do not... For example, in my deck, I am not running Stove Guard, and even with Stove Guard, there is no guarantee of getting Arlecchino's talent card, and without her talent card, Arlecchino is extremely weak and easily taken out. So for those cases, having Frost Operative, spreading Bond of Life with Frost Operative and then going to Arlecchino is a viable backup plan. But yes, Arlecchino is now good in aggro, of course. Like I mentioned, we are not currently running aggro, so you'll have to wait further into the future for that.
Please remain seated.
Of course, I could quickly note this video and my next video are pre-recorded before Christmas, because it's the holiday season. I'm not gonna be spending my time making some YouTube videos for my own amusement, and hopefully for the amusement of few others. I mean, I honestly make these videos because I personally... well, sometimes I want to just share my thoughts, you know. And sometimes I find some entertaining, funny thing in the game that you can take advantage of, and I want to show it to the world. But anyway...
Overruled.
Is there anything else to... Oh yeah, something I forgot to mention. Also in the past, like I said, I've been a big use Frost Operative with Arlecchino person, use an Anemo character with Arlecchino person. Now with the current changes, neither of them are no longer a necessity. Frost Operative is still a very good choice, especially if you want to go for an aggressive Arlecchino deck, because once again, Frost Operative can also spread the Bond of Life. Not to mention, she is a cryo character, meaning just another cryo character instead of Lanyan, and you get access to cryo resonance, which is of course the best resonance buff for aggressive decks. And one other thing I've said in the past is I have considered Engulfing Lightning, Raiden's weapon, to be the best possible weapon for Arlecchino in the past. Why, you might wonder? Because Arlecchino only heals with her burst, meaning you want to get her burst as soon as possible. Engulfing Lightning immediately gives you 1 energy when your character has 0 energy, of course, once per round I believe, but that usually means it activates once per round, and not many characters burst that often unless you are running some double electro deck, but enough about that. The point is, I considered Engulfing Lightning the best weapon because the burst is the only way to heal, and in the past when I considered Arlecchino to be best in mid-range decks, you anyway had the time to play the Engulfing Lightning even though you already had energy because you were taking the game slow. You were waiting until your opponent exhausts some of their resources, or if you are against a star matchup, you wait until you've spread the Bond of Life to the most important characters so that you can threaten them all with Arlecchino's increased normal attack damage. But, like I said, that's all in the past. Nowadays, I do have to say Moonpiercer is the way to go with Arlecchino. Why? Because not only does the opponent take increased Bond of Life from the Blood Depth Directive, Arlecchino also gains more Bond of Life, because that used to be a problem in the past. You would do one skill with Arlecchino, it would be very difficult to actually stack up a bunch of Bond of Life if you stayed on Arlecchino. Because remember, there was 5 stacks, each granted 1 Bond of Life for Arlecchino. And quickly, if you do not know, Arlecchino of course heals based on the amount of point of life she has when she uses the burst. So to use the burst, you wanted to have a bunch of point of life so that you would of course heal to maximum HP. In the past that used to be very difficult because you have to spend 5 stacks of the Blood Debt Directive to get 5 point of life for Arlecchino. Usually in that process, if your opponent was playing any sort of summon deck or combo deck, you would lose most of your point of life before you could even use the burst. So Engulfing Lightning was good because you could play your Arlecchino, gain that 1 energy, use her skill, you would have 2 energy, you could swap out of Arlecchino, spread point of life with Frost Operative, Arlecchino would take minimal damage, and then at the when it's time to wipe the opponent or start being aggressive, you would switch back to Arlecchino, who now would have a more point of life because you've spread or spent all the Blood Debt Directives that the opponent has gained by dealing damage with the Frost Operative. But because you now have a bunch of point of life easily, because you now get 2 per stack, there's no fear of the point of life running out easily or fast. You can just easily, you can just keep it running.
Please appreciate my sincerity.
It's very easy to get a bunch of point of life for Arlecchino, is what I'm trying to say here. And because of that, Moonpiercer is now the better choice because you get more damage from the norm attack. Like when you have a weapon, I mentioned there earlier, like a skill plus the first norm attack to the character who has taken the first skill damage. That's like 2 damage, then 4. If you have so 6 in total. If you have a weapon, that's gonna be 8 damage from skill plus norm attack. And for that combo, Moonpiercer is of course a very good choice because it makes the skill cheap. So yeah. Nowadays I have to agree that Moonpiercer is the way to go for Arlecchino instead of Engulfing Lightning. Anyway, let's get into the next game. Now I wanted to keep this video short, but I did realize I yapped quite a lot in that first game, so let's just quickly speed through these other 2 games that I have for today. Only 3 games today. Like I said, we are trying to keep it short.
Please appreciate my sincerity.
So yeah, in this matchup I think the best thing to show is the fact that how good Arlecchino's talent card is. Of course, if some of you may not know, Arlecchino's talent card, which used to be on release a 2-cost card, was actually buffed in past versions to only cost 1 dice. That was the first buff Arlecchino got, and now that the Blood Debt Directive has changed, she now has a second.
No need to fret.
That's her second buff since release. Depending on how much usage Arlecchino will see in this patch, I'm not surprised if we see Arlecchino getting even more buffs in the future, mostly to max HP, which is actually like one thing I would have buffed with Arlecchino would have been max HP, but the skill change also works. Of course, like I mentioned, it now instead of a buff that supports Arlecchino's playstyle, it basically changed how Arlecchino should be, should be played. But I consider it to be the best way to play her, which was mid-range. But now I do have to say, like after I have played with her, I can now say she's probably best used in aggressive decks. Or if you still want to go for mid-range decks, then I would say the double Geo is actually a decent choice. Of course, I do also have to say the double Geo in those decks you usually end up relying for Arlecchino, for everything, for the damage, for the tanking of damage.
An insurmountable problem, I presume. One fell swoop.
But yeah. I could also quickly mention, because I do realize there might be someone among the audience who doesn't know what Arlecchino's talent card does. Let's put that to slow. What Arlecchino's talent card does, and why do I say that it is a must-have card when you play Arlecchino? When it is played, it is considered a combat action. Of course, you can only play it when Arlecchino is your active character. When it's played, it's considered a combat action, meaning it switches to your opponent's turn, so it can be used to stall the game.
Overruled.
It gives you immediately 3 stacks of Bond of Life for Arlecchino, and whenever Arlecchino takes damage, 1 stack of Bond of Life is used to negate 1 damage. Basically, as long as you have Bond of Life, each instance of damage -1. That means combo decks and certain summon decks are very weak against Arlecchino. Cards like Oceanid with her summons do almost no damage. Chiori summons, even with the damage buff, do almost no damage. With Chiori plus Zhongli talent, then there's actually some damage coming in. But even still, it's -1 damage, and I think it is best shown in this game by Chaska bullets, which each do, of course, 1 stack of damage. And we see here, of course, pierce damage from the reaction, but you're gonna see 1 bullet, 0. Second bullet, 0. And the third bullet, 0 because of the shield. So, as you're gonna see, Arlecchino is extremely strong against decks that rely on small damage numbers that appear often. I don't know, but there's probably a better way to say that with other terms. But to put it simply, Sidlali Burst, for example, 2 plus, of course, like Sidlali's skill, like you can see here, 0 damage because of the shield, 0 damage from the follow-up because Sidlali got 2 Night Soul points. And we still have 6 Bond of Life. Thanks to the buffed Blood Depth Directive, it is so much easier to get the Bond of Life even when you are only sitting on Arlecchino. And of course, the best artifact for Arlecchino still is the Tenacity. For the very reason you saw in this match, you can tank so much damage with Arlecchino.
Disgrace.
If you are wondering why did I go changing characters here, because of the Golden Roop had already max stacks on Lanyan, so I wanted to get some value
No
out
need
of
to
that.
fret. I shall handle.
Of course, the Fatui Ambush gives Pyro, like every time I play this deck, it gives me Pyro when I'm sitting on Arlecchino. So completely useless. And you can see here, we are back to 8 stacks. We have still 7 HP, but we've taken practically no damage. And there you see the increased normal attack consuming bunch of the Bond of Life the opponent had. And of course it is immediately regained because there's the Blood Depth Directive on the field. Oh, and there we also see, as you can see, we now have the Moon Piercer. Like I mentioned, it is now the best weapon to use for Arlecchino, instead of just the Engulfing Lightning that I consider to be better for the old Belay style of Arlecchino. Once again, you can see zeros after zeros, because we do not take any damage thanks to the talent card. And we've finished the game. Let's get into the last game of the day. Now in this matchup we of course have the closest thing to any sort of meta deck, actually a meta deck from the past. I think it is called finally, visual Lini Nahida Sofai Li.
No need
Visual
to fret.
Nahida Lini
I shall
finally.
handle this.
An older meta deck, Of course, these days there are stronger decks, but that is still a very good. That's like the Leeway Armory, if you happen to know the deck. Shao, Shenhe, and Yelan deck. Like they are old decks, but they are still very good. They are simply just, if you talk about the meta, there are stronger decks these days.
No rest for the wicked.
But an old classic, so to speak. And well, I actually did face against I think it's the current biggest meta deck, at least so I've heard. The Lini, you have Escoffier, and then you have Hydro Tulpa. I think that is considered to be the current biggest meta deck, since the Yansan Sayu combo got nerfed quite a lot. The Yansan Sayu Sidlali combo. Of course, Yansan and Sidlali both got nerfed in the last patch. So that deck is no longer, like even that deck is still very good, it's just not as good as it used to be. But like I mentioned, I did face against the Escoffier Lini Tulpa, and I actually lost twice to that deck with the current one, so that goes to show Arlecchino, well, at least this deck is not good against that meta deck. Well, maybe if you get lucky with your cards, of course. Any deck can win against any other deck. It all really comes down to who has the who gets their game plan going better.
Please appreciate my sincerity.
Gets the cards they need, gets the dice to play those cards, and so forth and so forth. Somewhat wasted Mystic Soup here round 1, only really spending 1 stack. But what can you do? Getting the talent card is actually quite good, because that means we can spread a bunch of Bond of Life on the Lini, meaning he cannot heal with the prop surplus stacks. Of course, due to our dice, we have to tune the weapon there. Not a big deal, but always somewhat of a shame to lose the extra damage. Overload doesn't really mean anything, that just gives us the free switch to Lanyan, who has the golden droop, so an easy swirl. Of course, with the rest of my dice, a normal attack from Arlecchino is the best I can do. Unfortunately, this does mean that they get to spread the Nahida seeds, even though they don't have the dice for the 5-cost skill.
Please appreciate
I end up switching characters because I realized that Nahida does have her burst, meaning that Arlecchino would be taken out, since the summons and especially the seeds would take so much HP off from Nahida. No, not Nahida, from Arlecchino. Of course, the overload here also means that Lanyan doesn't get golden troop stacks, but that is not a big deal. If you can get a swirl from here, we get Nahida out of the game, and Official takes quite a good amount of damage. Of course, Lini is practically dead from one Arlecchino normal attack here. Of course, they have some food cards to keep Nahida alive, so unfortunately we cannot snipe her, but we go for the skill anyway, since we want to get the shields.
I've been waiting.
Switching to Frost Operative to avoid any reaction damage, especially now that there's the Nahida ultimate on the field. It is quite scary.
Must go on.
And we do Frost Operative skill to one-shot Official with Arlecchino or with a Pyro Swirl, which we can get here if Lanyan stays alive.
I have...
Of course, she does not because of the Shrine of Maya.
The bell rings no more.
And here it is starting to look quite scary for me, but luckily I do have the gamblers, and we can use the arcane card to look for better cards. After all, we don't need any of those. Unfortunately, we do not really get anything that special, but with a cute Fatui conspiracy we can get really lucky. So we play that, and would you look at that, Pyro once again, but luckily in this case it is actually very good, because now if my opponent does a visual skill, the Fatui ambush will immediately take visual out of the game. Of course, the scary part here is my opponent does have the Nahida Ult Catalyze, I have the Dendro, and they have played White Glove and the Fisherman. If there's any more damage than that, Arlecchino will be taken out. But there is not.
One shall
And,
descend
well,
once again.
quick end note before the end of the game. I'm not saying this deck cannot work in the current meta, you probably just have to make some bigger changes than I did, like I only switched weapons and added Noblesse Oblige to my old deck. Why am I running, by the way, Noblesse Oblige? Because the sudden burst from either from Arlecchino to quickly heal, or from Frost Operative to get the increased damage, is sometimes very good. And of course, we are anyway running artifacts and Timaeus in this deck, as you've seen in the previous games, so keeping Noblesse Oblige is, in my opinion, a decently good surprise factor in a deck like this. But yeah, I'm not saying you cannot make this deck work. I personally had success, of course, but to be honest, I didn't really face, like, outside of those two instances against Lini, Escoffier, Tulpa, I didn't face any other what would be called meta decks in this current patch. So I cannot really say how well this works against them, but you will definitely see success if you try this out. But I personally would recommend trying Arlecchino in an aggro deck. I personally will try her out in an aggressive deck in the future, but that will be in the future.
This is where
Anyway, that is all for today. I'll see you all next time.